I mean, it is it is kind of funny because the Bundesliga title race in my books is wrapped up, and it's a shame because I wanted Bayern and Leverkusen go to the very end, um, and sort of give us this duel, give us excitement until the final match day. And then I was thinking, like, well, maybe we get them in the Champions League against one another, and unfortunately, we also getting that in March. So one of those two teams will be out of the Champions League. Um, and it's been really interesting to see them kind of go in lockstep, even though the Bundesliga title race is kind of over. So it's been interesting kind of seeing them go in lockstep over the last few weeks, really kind of matching each other. Bayern Munich had Frankfurt last week. Leverkusen had Frankfurt in Frankfurt this week. I only was able to catch the highlights because I was out this morning. But Stefan, from what I've seen, this was an extremely dominant Bayer Leverkusen performance. They looked at this Bayern Munich game last week and said, "Hold my beer, we're gonna do this in the Waldstadion in Frankfurt."
Yeah, I watched this game. I was chatting along to the subscribers during it, and it was an entertaining match. I was hoping it would be an entertaining match. Sometimes these kind of big top four games this season have been real stinkers because Bayern or Dortmund or whoever else or Leverkusen actually more than others grind out results as opposed to just kind of throwing caution to the wind. But thankfully Frankfurt don't know how to defend. So, they kind of made it a good game whether they wanted to or not. And yeah, it was just another game. It was almost identical to the Bayern Munich match, to be perfectly honest with you. Frankfurt had their chances. Hugo Ekitike scored a goal. Admittedly, it was a goal that Mukiele gifted him. It was a pass back, which wasn't fast enough, so Ekitike latched onto it and basically rounded Hradecky in goal and scored. And yeah, Frankfurt had their chances. I mean, it was quite an open game. They finished the game with an XG of about 1.8, so it's not the end of the world. But the problem is that defense, and it always comes down to this. And I was actually checking the stats during the match actually, and I think I'm right in saying they've only kept one clean sheet in 7 games against last season's top 6 so far this season. And obviously, when you stack this one up with the Bayern Munich game, it's a lot of goals they've conceded. And it's not hard to see why. You only have to watch the highlights and you'll see it in that first goal where Nathan Teller, pulls away from, I'm guessing it was Nauf on the right-hand side or maybe Christensen. And he just kind of drifts along that front line and you can see Granit Xhaka watching him and Granit Xhaka just plays his ball. And he's basically behind Robin Koch. And, Koch's just completely oblivious to him being there. And it's just something I kind of ranted about social media. I was chatting to our subscribers about. And I just feel like, if Frankfurt want to be a serious club and they want to be a top 4 side, and they want to be a side potentially challenging for major things, then that defence is just it's just not up to scratch, to be perfectly honest with you. And it's good enough, obviously, to get them by. And they obviously have enough firepower going forward that they can beat teams who are mid-table and teams who are bottom of the table. And obviously, over the course of the season, that does enough for them. But they are routinely getting pulled apart by good teams in the Bundesliga this season. And Leverkusen did exactly that. We did kind of talk about this in the previous show as to maybe whether Leverkusen would play, a backup team or rest some players. And, I was pleased to see that Xabi Alonso didn't do that. He more or less played his strongest team. And yeah, they just completely tore through Frankfurt, and it was another game. I think I spoke about this actually in the Bayern Munich game, and I know he didn't score, but there's definitely something about Nathan Teller which I find just really quite interesting in this Leverkusen team. He's not a big goal scorer. He's not a guy who sets up goals, but he's just almost like a good runner, or he's just very good at doing or performing the instructions that are asked of him. He scored a great goal tonight against Frankfurt. It was a really well taken goal. And the run he made shows that he knows what he's doing there. It's a really well taken, was really kind of well disciplined run that you'd see from a striker. And he's just always quite good at this with Leverkusen. He's just a player that Xabi Alonso clearly trusts to just do a job on that left-hand side, whether it's a defensive job or an attacking job. And he always does it. And he's never the guy who scores the goals. He's never the guy who sets up the goals, but he's just a player who never really seems to have a bad performance.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of low key, just totally flying under the radar this season, I think, in terms of being a really important player to that Leverkusen team. I'm trying to think of a good comparison to maybe draw to, and I keep thinking of Kevin Grosskreutz, but that's just me every weekend, I guess.
He's way
But
better.
yeah, I know
Teller
he
is.
is way better. I'm just trying to think of a player who's like really undervalued or underappreciated, but the club itself and the manager himself really appreciate him.
I have one. Hoffmann.
Yeah,
He's the new Hoffmann.
yeah. I think that's actually a really good example. That's a perfect example, actually, because Hoffman hasn't played at all this season, so he's probably just stepped into his role. And yeah, you're right. He's just he obviously scores a goal tonight. He puts in a good shift. I think Leverkusen looked really on top of things. You know, I thought Patrick Schick took his goal extremely well. Garcia scores a great goal as well. Mukiele scores from a set piece. Okay, it's just kind of easy tap in. But for the most part, that front line in particular, I thought looked really sharp. That midfield looked really sharp. Granit Xhaka was everywhere. There's still some issues in defence, maybe, and that'll be really interesting to see if that actually gets tested in the Champions League. But going forward, I thought Leverkusen were outstanding, and they just quite happily just kind of tore Frankfurt apart over the course of 90 minutes.
I mean, for Frankfurt, this is has consequences, right? They remain on 42 points after 2 heavy defeats in a row. That goal differential took a hit. The team behind them, Mainz, actually has now a better goal differential than they do, and they're just 1 point behind that. Freiburg can go on 42 points as well, again with a win. They have a negative goal differential, so there's at least that. But Frankfurt were a team that looked like they were cruising to Champions League contention, and now they have to kind of look over their shoulders a little bit. And I think that is a story that we have to watch a little bit on how they are going to take 2 really poor performances, I think, where you could really see their weaknesses, and you could maybe say, well, maybe they're not quite ready yet. They have Union Berlin next Sunday. They play in the Europa League midweek, right? Against Ajax, which is going to be a difficult fixture. And then the week after they have Bochum on the Sunday. Back to back, of course, and get Ajax sandwich in between. And just looking up, and then there's Stuttgart. And so a Stuttgart side who by then could be breathing down their neck. So some really important weeks coming up for Eintracht Frankfurt. I think that will determine the outcome of the rest of the season in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're right. And we've been kind of praising them quite a lot this season for the manner in which they've managed to stay in a third. And this conversation we were having in subscriber chat during the game, that actually, if you look at a lot of the big teams who finished in the kind of top 6, top 8 last season, most of them are actually doing poorer than they did last year. There's only maybe 1 or 2 who are doing better. Bayern Munich, the most obvious example of that. Frankfurt have maybe benefited from the fact that Leipzig, Dortmund, even Leverkusen, the first half of the season really dropped off. And Stuttgart, of course, hugely because the players they lost. So it's going to be a real test for Frankfurt to see if they can kind of bounce back. Those Ajax ties will be really difficult. And they play 2 teams fighting for survival at the bottom of the table, but also 2 teams that they should be picking up maximum points from. Yeah, their season kind of hangs in the balance right now, as opposed to whether it be a very good season and a top 4 finish. And, we spoke at length about what that would mean for the club. Or if they kind of drop out the top 4 and end up finishing 5th or 6th, and it's another season in Europa League, and maybe they then have to sell a few players, and suddenly they're back to square one next season.
Yeah, absolutely.